I was just playing.
Yeah, I like this. Yeah, I like this one.
And then if anything goes like square or whatever, you just send me an email and then
Okay.
put it there. And we also have it downloaded.
Just in case.
We think the internet was like it's weak, but they like came and fixed it. It's always a bit faster than it has been before. So
Yes, okay. I was gonna say, should we just go ahead and use the PDF? Or
I think it's
so?
fine. Yeah, it hasn't gone out like water here.
Okay.
Miss, your hair is fabulous.
Thank you. Yours is too. I love your hair. No, this looks good. Great, okay. All right, everyone, we'll get started here in a few moments. We're waiting for folks to join on Zoom, so give it just a few minutes or two. I know some people wanted to join on Zoom. Good morning.
Yeah,
So we can just give it, we're only 5 after, so we can give it about 5 more minutes. Where did music go? Right here.
Thank you so much. I think it's just.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's still quiet.
Oh, it's just quiet.
A couple cars just pulled in the parking lot, so if you
Yeah.
wait like a couple minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I already have like 5 minutes.
Okay.
Yes.
Perfect.
She is so energetic. Like I said, yeah, I got her to do some AFT. That's work too, because she is. Yeah, she is. She helps me.
No, I'm fine. I have water. Thank you.
Really good. They kept hanging. So it's still, it's just destroyed.
I know, right? Hi, Greg.
Hello.
One. I only see one.
I mean, I'm still at all. Okay.
Paul, can you set this up? I think I'm gonna get started. So I'm unmuted. It's recording and just present. How do I make it full screen? This view is so off to me.
We can just do like that.
And the screen is being shared on Zoom. So this is like presenter view.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm gonna start adding my notes on here because I'm always afraid to use this because I never know if I'm gonna have the ability to do it or not. Okay. So,
Microphone's on.
it's not advanced.
You may have to just on like that side.
It's just kind of slow. All right, y'all ready to get started? Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to Tactical Committee session number 5. It's so nice to see you all in person, and thank you for coming and being here and being present. A special thanks, as always, to Metro Tech for really giving us a space where we can come together, be safe, socially distanced. We hope to really start transitioning back into person, primarily because we just know the engagement and the conversations and dialogue are so much richer when we can be physically together. So we will do our part definitely to make sure that we can make this a safe environment and socially distance, have masks, have hand sanitizer, and do what we need to do to make everybody feel safe and comfortable. So today's session, I'm really excited about. This is one of my favorite topics. Will be about design, culture, and aesthetics, and how those different elements can connect and be explored for the South of 8 neighborhood areas. So we will have a lot of fun discussing those topics today and a lot of content to cover. We'll be having speakers, Christina Beatty and Deborah Richards, come and go over those topics with us. But before that, we'll be refreshing on some of the goals and objectives of the project. And thank you all so much who have emailed and asked questions and give us feedback about these engagement sessions, because it's so important to us that this is really rooted and connected and relevant to how you all are understanding it. So when you all ask questions and give feedback, it helps us to strengthen and make the best use of our time together. So we got a few emails about, can we be reminded on what are the tangible outcomes of this work and how is all this coming together? So we'll definitely give a brief overview on that. And then after Christina and Deborah's presentation today, we'll do Q&A and have dialogue and share our ideas and thoughts on how does culture, design, and aesthetics connect to this area. So just a few housekeeping things. There are still a handful of you that we have not received a bio or a headshot from today. So we'll be following up individually to see how we can best support you submitting that, hopefully today or by the end of this weekend. And we're also missing the committee form from some of you as well, the committee agreement form. So I know it's been a while since you all received that, so if you need another copy, we can make sure we get that to you, and hopefully we can get this closed out by the end of this weekend. Also, another big piece of news. So we are having our next open broad community event on March 5th. And if any of you came to the November event, some of you know we're there. We really had a great turnout and had over 200 people collectively come to both of these sessions. And if you remember, we kind of had this setup of like do it yourself, choose your own path for engagement. We had different activities set up in our space. People got to choose how they interacted and shared their feedback and their reflections and memories about the area. And that worked very well for that session because it was all about reflecting and collecting memories and hearing those stories. But now that we're moving into the visioning stage of the project, we're going to have more focused, targeted activities to really collect information and details and goals from community members. So this is going to take a lot more hands-on facilitation than the first event did. So we are going to ask if anyone's available on March 5th to come and be with us and help us facilitate some of those sessions. We're going to have two. One is at 9:30 and we'll go until 12. And the next one is at 1 and we'll go until 3:30. And so if you're available and can help be some boots on the ground that day and help us facilitate and sort of have these discussions, we are expecting another big turnout. And this will all be taking place at Page Wilson in the basement event space under the auditorium. And we're going to have tables that we have community members sit at, or we'll have these activities. And so our goal is to have a facilitator at each table to make sure that people are understanding the activity, they're moving forward with it, and they have someone there to support that whole process with them. So March 5th, 9:30 to 12, and then 1 to 3:30. We can't do both. If you can do one, we would greatly appreciate that. And so if you can let us know today or touch base with us sometime this week and let us know if you can be there, that would really help us and know what kind of capacity we're walking into an open event session with. So that is coming up, and we'll have 3 of those events this year until the end of the project. All right, just to briefly recap the previous session, last time we met, we had a really great session where we invited stakeholder institutions to come and have conversations with us about what are their plans and ideas for the future, what are some of the programs that we may be as a community be able to connect to, and how can we better be more intentional about developing partnerships through this community and these neighboring institutions. So we had OU Health Sciences Center come and speak with us about some of those ideas and plans. And I'm super excited to welcome some individuals from OU Health Sciences Center that are joining our committee and helping us with the visioning phase of the project and bringing in that represent. Can you hear me? I think y'all can hear me. I can talk loud enough. That will be bringing in representation to help us explore how partnerships can be further developed and strengthened between OU Health Sciences Center and the community. So welcome to our friends from OU Health Sciences Center. And then we also had the Innovation District come and speak with us about programs and activities that they're doing to better connect with the Northeast OKC community, and heard a lot of great information about how they're doing that work. And then we had Kathy and Leslie Bachelor with the Oklahoma City Urban Renewal Authority come and speak to us specifically about TIF districts and how those models work to help incentivize and stimulate development in underserved areas. We got a really great overview of what a TIF district is and how that works. They also shared a video with us, I believe we sent out to everybody, that gave really a broad overview of how TIF districts work. So we'll, if you didn't get it, please let us know, because that was a really helpful tool to kind of understand it and that we can keep referencing as we move forward in this process. And again, just helping us understand all the different options available to us as we look at the redevelopment of the South of 8th area. So, right on time. Thank you guys. Perfect. We got this. Thank you. Hello. Oh. I have to just stay up here with me, okay? Sorry, Greg, Quincy, and everybody on Zoom. We're having some technical difficulties. But I really want you guys to see these slides, because this next section is about the outcomes from our collaboration is something that we wanted to refresh everybody on. Can y'all hear me on Zoom okay? So, hello. Hello. I'm gonna talk, but hopefully we use the mics really for Zoom because it's kind of hard to hear on Zoom, but hopefully, let me know if you guys can hear. Oh, okay, here we go. All right, thank you guys. So refreshing on outcomes, and I want to be really clear that these are the outcomes that we've identified that stand today. This process could really open up and help other possibilities and outcomes emerge from this process, but these are the specific outcomes that are, as it stands today, that we're exploring, but more can be added to this list as the process advances. So first and foremost, the results of this work, of this collaborative engagement process, is to create a vision plan, also known as a master site plan, to inform and guide what development can look like on the Okura, Oklahoma City Urban Renewal Authority owned lots in the area. And so some of the elements that will be included in this master site plan include design features such as building use, building height and types, land use, possibilities, what does public space look like in this context? Y'all, there we go. What does public space look like in this context? Street design, accessibility, how does all that connect, and more. And also it will inform if we have recommendations on how to implement design standards in this area. And so this is why this engagement and you all's participation is so critical in making sure that the broader community events, everyone who wants to be a part of this process, because we want to make sure that everyone's voices who wants to be included in this work are included in this plan and are reflected in this plan to the best of our ability, and making sure it really represents and reflects the community's needs and desires. So this is like the big deliverable that will come from this work, and all of what will be in this plan is translated from what we're hearing from you all and the engagement and the activities and dialogue that we're sharing. Another possible outcome from this work together is what we're calling Okura advisors, if you will. And so there has been a request that there is a group of stakeholders that can engage even after the life of Southwood 8, after this work is done, that can work with Okura on going to sort of be this brain trust, or sort of like a consulting type of group that can help collaborate and inform future and further recommendations on different projects. So that's definitely a possibility that I know that Okura has expressed. And if you all are interested, we can definitely continue that conversation. Also, another outcome of this work is really informing the RFP process, which this is a process that Okura has interested land owners and purchasers, and also developers go through to be considered to take over and to the lands to be released to them they own. So RFP for request for proposal is that process that really situates and creates parameters and expectations and criteria for people to own, purchase, and develop this land. And so this process will help inform that. And you can learn more about the Okura RFP on that link on their website, it's just okura-ok.org. And they have a section on RFPs on the website. So that would be another outcome of this work. And also, if you want to hear specifically how Okura messaged that in our first technical committee session, you can go to our website, Facebook, or YouTube, where we have our videos recorded, and watch the first session and just advance the video to the 2-hour, 23-minute. We can share this information with you too, so you don't have to remember that. But you can advance to the video section where they talk about that and hear specifically how that was worded. And also a big hope and intention that we have from this process is that relationship cultivation can happen. I know many of you came into this process knowing each other previously. Some of you are new to one another, but our hope is that we are adding to the strengthening of relationship building and cultivation in the community that will extend beyond this project and will help foster those connections in a way that we can help lead the future development of our community together. So that's kind of a snapshot.
Yeah, you have to tell them your goals and your dreams.
The outcomes of the project so far. Okay.
Yeah, just clarification, right? So this is to provide all those activities for on Okura own property.
Yes.
So you see the complexity within that and private owner. So I'm
Yes.
just curious if there's going to be sort of a section on these items Okura owners, and then, yeah.
Yeah, so you actually just laid the way to transition into the next part of the presentation. We're gonna talk about those different dynamics and how we can really bring in this collaborative effort to include the other property owners who have a large influence over what's gonna happen in the South of Dade to come together to hopefully put together a cohesive plan to inform what can happen in the area. Deborah.
And I just want to mention that I think the drawing and the ideas that we have will encompass the whole area, but we have really only direct influence on the Okura property. So we're hoping that other property owners and entities kind of buy in and collaborate with them.
All right. Which is going to be what our activity is focused on today. So thank you for that question. So throughout this process, we've been learning about the several different dynamics that are happening in the South of Dade area. And to Yakim's point, there are several, we've seen this map is a different variation, but we've seen this land ownership map right throughout the project and really recognizing how, yes, this work is to inform the Okura on lots, but to look at the holistic viewpoint. How do we understand the plans and make connections with other property owners in the area to come together and share ideas, share goals, share plans, and what we hope to be building a cohesive vision for the area that respects the neighborhood and achieves everyone's goals. So here is a map of that property ownership mix in the area. As you all know, we're looking at hoping to look at this whole neighborhood holistically. The Okura owned lots are in the navy blue color, which is a very small percentage, relatively speaking, to the other property ownership dynamics in the area. So we have PHF, Presbyterian Health Foundation, that owns property in the area in that lighter blue color. OU Board of Regents in the baby blue color, the property that they own along 8th Street. Then we have a mix of private entities and private property owners who own the rest of the property. And in the maroon color, in the area south of 4th Street, there is a mix of business entities, and they're listed here on the screen. Yes.
I just wondered, when you initially were looking at the map, the area south, and I know that it appears that the large majority of private landowners, when those lands were originally acquired by the Marine Authority, and those original landowners, do we know at what point it moved from the original landowners looking at homes there to whoever the current landowners are, or were they always,
Yeah, I'm not, anyone, Deborah, I don't know if you guys are familiar with that timeline. I don't
I can probably
speak to that.
I can tell you, I can speak for myself.
Okay.
And I don't know if you guys know, but I'll just be perfectly candid. I own myself. I got 3 or 4 lots over there. When I moved to New York, when I left here after graduation, and I moved to New York City, and my brother and I grew up over here. My brother kind of fashioned himself. He said he would always think he was some kind of developer a long time ago. When he was a little boy. And he would call me and say, this area, we knew what had happened because we were at church and everything. And he said, we should start buying property over here. That for me was back in the 90s. I was like 1990, and those properties were listed on tax rolls. I don't know. I mean, that's how I purchased the lots that I have. I purchased from the county. These other lands, like Pat Garrett, I know they went through a process a few years ago. And when I say a few years ago, probably in the early 2000s, when they were trying to acquire all of that land because they were reaching out to individual landowners, because they reached out to me actually, and I just refused. I refused to sell at that time. But I knew a lot of people, not personally, but I knew of a lot of individual owners who sold their lots to them. And so that was, like I said, that was the early 2000s. And that's short of that, I don't know when they really did the majority of their acquisitions. But I know that a lot of those lots were county owned. They were on the county assessor rolls. And for years, years, they were held where you could go and purchase them for just whatever tax was owed on it, or you could purchase them for not just whatever tax was owed on. Usually it didn't go to the county's rolls unless there was some sort of tax liability and or a city liability in the form of an abatement. And that's when it would go to the county. And usually it had to sit there for like 3 years before it would go to the county. So, and then they had a whole process. I know when I picked up the few lots that I had, they had a whole process by which, if you wanted to purchase it, you could approach them with an offer, and they would then advertise it for 3 weeks in the Journal Record and in several other newspapers to see if anybody came forth to contest it or ask for, yes. And so that was the process by which we went through. So I don't know, again, I think the other landholders, I think they actually acquired a lot of what they acquired by actually approaching individual holders, and those individual holders sold the land to them.
Thank you, Janelle. You're welcome. Great question. So yes, this is a map that's detailing those different ownership dynamics and really speaks to the importance, for one, acknowledging the influence, right, that they have in the area, because most of the property is owned by those different entities and individuals, and the need to make sure that there's a way that we can connect and explore ideas on how we can work together and bring these ideas together. So another dynamic in the area that we see here on our screen is called PUD 1700. And a PUD, also known as a planned unit development, is a special zoning designation that is typically used as a mechanism to give a property or a collection of properties the ability to be governed by requirements that were specifically approved for the development plans in that area. And so here on your screen, I apologize, it's a little tricky to see, but the line properties, or the properties that have the lines going through them, are all a part of PUD 1700. And so this was developed by a group of some of the property owners in the area. And again, are reflected by the striped areas on the map. And the joint applicants for this PUD consists of 16 different property owners and entities.
I'm
in-
not one of
Gina is not one of the people in this PUD, okay? Let's be very clear. So, and they have joined together to essentially have their properties rezoned in a way that begin to better align with their development goals instead of what was the original zoning in the area. And so there are different features. We actually gave you all, or are giving you all a handout today that breaks that down so you can take the information and process it some more. But some of the features of this PUD are that there are no height restrictions for the incoming development that can come into the area. And that's not to say that that's going to necessarily be the plans of the property owners in the area, but that's just one of the considerations. And again, the importance of us being able to communicate and share our ideas and what this plan is developing out to be, and understanding their goals and their plans as well. So we can, again, with the hope and the intention of coming together and building a plan that will be respectful and benefit this community area. So one of our committee members today, Mr. Dwayne Walker, is going to come up and share with us and kind of explore how we might work to thoughtfully approach, how can we come together, what could that dialogue possibly look like, how can that be facilitated, and how would we consider this. And so I'm really excited to introduce Mr. Dwayne. He is a community leader and entrepreneur in the Oklahoma City area that provides leadership to Cosmopolitan Construction, Kingdom First Construction, Cosmopolitan Rentals, Salt and Sage Boutique, and Oklahoma City Advancement, and has been such a phenomenal member of this committee since its fruition. So please help me welcome Mr. Dwayne. And I'm gonna turn my over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vanessa. Thank you so much. Should I stand over there?
Yes, this is where the camera is for the Zoom.
Okay,
So
excellent.
you'll see it on the screen. Thank you.
Hello, everybody on Zoom. First, this time check. What is, give me the amount of time that we want to spend on this activity, so we'll make sure we honor y'all for
25 minutes.
25 minutes, okay. Will you be the timekeeper?
I sure
Give me
will.
5-minute warning,
Okay.
okay? Well, it's so good to see everybody, and I'll tell you this, I must begin by saying it's been an honor to be a part of this committee. I've never been a part of a group of people this diverse in experience, knowledge. Let's go over this way. Oh, okay, there it is. Okay, got it, thank you. And influence. It's just been really cool to listen online and in person each and every week. I'm learning about so many different ways to lead, especially in this kind of space. And so I've told Deborah this a number of times. I really appreciate you guys' leadership. I mean, to not only bring these things together, but even to bring this group of people together. That is rare. And so thank you guys so much for everything that you're doing. And so guys, I'm excited to bring this little collaboration together, this conversation together on, really, it was your question. Tell me your name.
Oh, my name is Yakin.
Yakum, what a phenomenal question. Yakum earlier was like, okay, so we're delivering a design plan just for the Okura land. What about the private land? Like, and so Yakum, tell me why you asked that question. And can I bring the mic to you? You're okay with that? Okay. Oh, we got a second mic? Work it.
Hopefully it works.
I mean, it's a big space, right? And I think Okura only plays a part in it. So if we are providing sort of guidance for Okura how to use that space, how would that be possible if the other parts are not in it? So that's where I was bringing that question from.
Phenomenal question. And Vanessa was like, man, that's a perfect segue because I just couldn't agree more. This is what I would say. Let me ask a different question. Who are some people that own land anywhere south of 8? We already heard from one person, Gina. Is there anybody else that's maybe online that you're like, yeah, that's me. Anybody that's there? Okay, I can't necessarily. I'm gonna look at the chat.
I'm right outside the area.
You're right outside the area.
Right on the boundary.
Well, I want to say this. Man, I want to say like 7, maybe 8 months ago, there was a group of, when I say group, there was 2 individuals basically that own a lot of area or can have a lot of influence in this area. Gina mentioned one of them, Pat. There's another guy named Bert. They basically were having the very opposite challenge that you just mentioned. They were saying, we own all of this, but the same is true for them. And that is, but Okura owns a lot too. And that hinders our overall vision of what we want to do. That makes sense? Also, people who own private land that said, wait a minute, I don't feel comfortable selling this to you. That also created tension. And first thing I want to say is tension isn't always a bad thing. Tension sometimes creates conversation to say, well, what's your problem? And we get to hear it. And then we can say, well, let me tell you what my problem is. And hopefully we can find a solution. So I actually want to, at least from my perspective, tell you, I believe that some of the people who decided not to sell their land are heroes in this moment. Because I believe that if that land would have been sold, that we wouldn't even be talking about this initiative today, because they wouldn't need to be at the table because they wouldn't have no problem. They would just go build what they want to build without talking to anybody. Does that make sense? And so just kind of a silent applause in our heads for all those people who said, no, we're not selling. So good job. Okay, really, really, really good job. So let me now transition to a different thought. if we're wanting to influence this entire area, but the only area that we can directly influence is the Okura land, what is the best way for us to engage with the people who have their own land? And matter of fact, this area in the maroon is a group of different people who've aligned themselves together to move in the same direction. So y'all tracking with that? So it's a group of people and private landowners who said, hey, we're together, let's go do X. What do you do whenever we're in this position that we're going to influence all of it, including their areas? Anybody have any thoughts? Chime on in. Anybody? Even online, if you have a thought, please come offline and say something.
I always have to.
Please give up.
But at the same time, I'm trying to determine how I want to, because my brothers are always telling me, watch how I say.
Yes.
But I think for me, like the first thing I thought about when I looked at the map, not looking at private owners, but looking at everybody in the Burgundy area, P&M Land Partners, Garrett Company, of course, are companies. And so when I think of those names and those titles, and then the Factory Warehouse brownstones, and then it was brought to my attention that the PUD 1700 and what that meant. Like immediately I felt like you already had a group of people that have decided what they wanted to do, whether or not it's been articulated, whether or not anyone knows what their plan is. And so for me, I would think one of the first steps is, I feel like maybe we're making this assumption. And I know for me, the first thing I thought of is when I look at things like that, I went with my first feeling of their intention is bad without me even knowing what it is. So I think for me, the first step is not having the assumption of just because they decided to do this, that they may have some of the same ideas or some of the same intentions that we're talking about, but because there's never been a conversation, like you said before, that I think a lot of times we just make broad assumptions. I mean, I did write all them down because I'm one of those people, I want to see who's involved, who their mama is, you know, where they grew up, things like that. And so I think for me, like, that's the first step, because it's really hard for me to determine how to collaborate or come with them when I don't even know, you know, what their goal is or what their vision is or why they decided to do that. And being in the neighborhood, you know, growing up over there, like I remember when the first development was I believe it was a HUD development, I believe that was first over there. And then years later, seeing, you know, the different developments and things that are happening now. I guess for me, it's just important for more people to have a voice, because what it appears to be for me in terms of what has happened is that you always have these entities or these companies because of the name that they have, and most number one meaningful thing, the access that they have to dollars to make things happen, that private owners, typically LLC entities, those are probably one person, two people, they may not be a huge company. They don't have the same voice or access as others do. So you hold on to, you know, what you have because you don't know what to do.
Yes.
And so for me, I guess the second thing would be education and not, you know, and working with private owners in terms of what they can do to be a part of it, not just in a conversation space, but giving them access and money and resources like you would larger companies and tax breaks and things like that. So.
Really good. Can you give her a hand or something? Yeah, great job. Before you go, let me just try to do my best to summarize what I believe you said. Tell me your name.
Latasha Timberlake.
Latasha Timberlake, thank you so much. What I heard you say was, number one, I'm not going to prejudge it. Number two, I'm going to have a conversation to get my mind around, what are y'all wanting to do? Then number three, I'm going to ask, will you give me access or us access to inform what you want to do so we can do something together? Is that correct? Okay, that was really well said. Go ahead. Tell us your name and.
My name is Vera Ford, and I represent Harrison Walnut Neighborhood Association. And I would just like to say that we have had several meetings with Pat Garrett, that company, Bert Nim, Michaela Holmes. They've showed us what their intentions are, what their plans, and what they would like to project. Who we have not had meetings or heard anything from has been with Okura. They're the ones who we have no clue, and that's where the suspicion comes in, is with them, is because we have not heard from them, so we do not know what their intentions are.
Thank you for that. Give her a hand as well. Would one of you guys want to respond to the first action?
Thank you, Cole. And so with this project, the whole intention and the reason why Okura hasn't shared any plans is because this project is supposed to inform what those plans will be. And so once this project is concluded, they will take the master site plan, the recommendations and the visioning that we have shared with them that's been informed by this process to then create a plan to release the properties and determine what can be developed in the area. So that's why you haven't probably heard anything yet, because this is coming before they make those determinations.
And I just want to say that the meetings that we have had with them have been possibly within the past, when they started acquiring and buying the property. This was before they submitted and did their PUD. We met with them, and I think maybe only one homeowner signed up with them for the PUD, but they've been meeting with us probably over the past 8 years, 7, 8 years or so, when they started buying up all the property. And I just want to piggyback on what was said earlier. A lot of the property was acquired because the original landowners had died. Their heirs never did anything. So therefore, the city would come in, or the county, whoever, and would have to mow and clean up and all of that. So it just got sold for taxes. Some of that property that I saw, but a 3-year period for taxes went for like maybe $50. And of course you had to go through the process of notifying, certified, all that newspaper, but still yet. But we were meeting with them 7, 8 years ago when they were acquiring all that property.
And just to clarify, when you were meeting with them, that was the folks with the PUD, not Okura.
Oh, no, Okura, we have not heard anything.
Okay, so the folks that have come together to develop the PUD is who's engaged, it seems like mildly, with Harrison Walnut Neighborhood neighbors. And this process will be informing Okura's plan as to what will happen in the area. So we will not hear anything from Okura until this process. They will not be selling or allowing any development to happen on their properties until this process is done, because they want to make sure it's centered on what the community needs and wants in this area. Thank you for your question, Vera.
So good, so good. Yeah. Go ahead, yeah, please. So get the mic so the people online can hear you.
Just to your question,
Please.
right, earlier on, what can be done in the sense, right? I appreciate you mentioning the heroes. I don't even know why I did that.
Yeah.
But they are heroes.
They are,
right?
man.
I'll be curious to find out the demography of those individuals, right?
Mm.
But then also, I would be also interested in auditing their desires and imagination for that space. What were the heroes for?
Yep.
So it really, to me, I think that is the central sort of answer. But also, whenever we talk about block spaces, we always look at it from a deficit point of view. And I'm really tired of that. And how can we realize the aspiration, dream? So Oklahoma let's look at it from all of its point of view as it relates to Black and this idea of Black Oklahoma. And what was realized by this Black imagination after Civil War and migrating up to Oklahoma. So I think, to me, all those things become a beautiful story that could be realized in that spot.
Agreed.
Absolutely. And I'll just add really quickly that even outside of the committee meetings that we're having and the broader community events, we are going to be having specific touch points with Harrison Walnut and with the JFK neighborhood to make sure that we're including those voices and what was the intention and what those experiences have been like.
And I just had a quick question, and I'm not sure if someone here can answer it, or because I'm still new to like the developmental process and development process and city, state codes and all that thing. But I just want clarity on the idea of someone existingly, like the sister here, already has land in an area that wants to be redeveloped to make a city and a state better. However, in order to do that, they are encouraged to sell that, which then somebody else comes in and buys that, and then that happens. So why do we need part two? Why can't that individual landowner, you know, get some type of incentives or things like that to build on their own land to do whatever? So I still kind of have that gray area in terms of understanding like the process. Because to me, especially when you know you are working in an area, I mean, and this is not something I'm making up, you can look historically, that has always thrived because of people of color. So why is it that people of color cannot benefit from the area in which they thrived and a lot of them built in it originally? Like, to me, I'm not clear on that.
One of the first sessions we had, and I understand you weren't at the first session, but the very first session we had, I did a summary of kind of how everything is connected. And in doing so, the goal was to try and make sure that we all were at the table understanding who the players were and why they were the players, which also included us as individuals, you know, in terms of community. What makes community and what makes for a great area? Why is it so difficult for this area now to see the type of robust development that you see in other areas? And so maybe, I don't know if that is still available to go back and look at, but if it is, I would encourage you, I think, to go back and look at that, because we don't have the time to sort of go through it again. But it's definitely possible. I mean, that's the whole idea. That's one of the, hopefully one of the fallout of this, is that we're able to identify young or not so young developers from the community, or recruit people who have a passion for the community and who want to do exactly what you're talking about. But there needs to be an understanding. There needs to be an understanding of how all of this stuff works. And I think being able to come to the table and have the same language, so that when people are talking, you're not walking away with one idea and they're walking away with the other idea. The whole reason for that first conversation that we had was that, in my mind, a lot of what has happened over the years here is a direct result of not miscommunication, but non-communication. It's like having a Spanish person sitting at the table with a French person and letting them start to talk.
Yeah.
That's what has been going on. And so the city, Okura, all of these institutional entities understand what they want. They understand why they have convened you. You think you understand what they want. And so you convene and you engage. And you walk away thinking this is going to happen because you have just poured out your heart and spent all of this time engaging. They walk away
having gained what they needed because they understood what they were looking for. You, on the other hand, because you were not familiar with the landscape, with the language of the landscape, with the topography of the landscape, and I'm using those metaphorically, but you were not familiar with all of that. And so you walked away thinking, they're gonna do this and execute this. No, not knowing that none of that execution comes from the public sector. It all comes from the private sector. And so all the public sector is doing is really creating the platform, the statutes, the laws, so that the private sector can do what they want to do. And they do this when you start talking about public-private partnerships, you're talking about private developers who are working with public entities and to align or move goals for a particular area. And Yakum, to understand or to answer one of your questions, I intentionally did not sell because, not that I knew this process was going to happen, and specifically this engagement, which is what we're doing now, but because I knew that I did not want to sell without hearing first what the community wanted.
Good.
And I also felt, because I knew some of the players and I knew and understood sort of the mind behind development and what motivates development and what motivates developers. And I understood that because I've been at the table, I've been in the room. So I know how that process goes, and I know what makes for why developers are motivated the way they are. And it's not necessarily that they're bad people or anything like that. It's just a lot of it has to do with market conditions. But I knew that the community was not going to necessarily want what they were pushing. And I thought it was important to not engage and not be part of the PUD, not sell my property. I get on a weekly basis, I get no less than 3 requests to buy my property, no less, every single week. And every single week, I'm blocking phone calls, telling people, do not call me again. I know how to sell my property if I want to, okay? Because I know this process is important and want to be involved in that process. If I can develop it myself, that's the goal. If I cannot, I want to make sure I align myself with someone who wants to do what the community wants to do. That was the reason I did not sell.
Thank you, Gina. And I'm going to turn to Dwayne like as soon as possible, but just in this spirit and this conversation about developers being positioned to do this kind of work, I wanted to hand it to Erica very briefly to talk about an initiative that Northeast Renaissance is working on to cultivate multiple cohorts of Black developers who can have access and go after the RFPs to help build up this community.
On Erica.
You guys know I don't like to speak.
Okay, thank you. 5-minute warning, guys.
So Placekeepers was developed, as a cohort for beginning developers. It's a 6-week weekend program where they get exposure to experienced developers, banking information. They're at the beginning stages, but they have to have access to funding and kind of an idea, because we want them to, right after they get out of this program, they connect with a mentor and then they go forward. They also have a conference, which is a little bit more advanced. And that's more concentrated, and it has more of like a panel situation. So really we're trying to get people who are wanting to be developers and wanting to figure out how do I do this. We just don't have like the next steps.
Yeah.
Trying to connect them to those next steps through
even resources that I have that I've gotten from other people, I'm trying to pass those along, and we all trying to pay it forward to the next generation. I think it's been pretty successful so far, but this is our first year, so we're going every year to do this.
So good. Give her a hand, give her a hand, give her a hand. Yeah. Well, thank you for that 5-minute warning. I'll try to summarize in the last 4 minutes.
Sorry.
No, this is really good. Like, honestly, I was hoping for this kind of dialogue, this kind of engagement, because I think it, at the end of the day, sets the stage for really what's coming next. It was very interesting, just the timing of the South of Asia initiative. At the same time, the timing that some of the private landholders peak of their frustration happened. Meaning, when I say peak of their frustration, I do want to share a little bit of why haven't they went ahead and started building yet, right? At the end of the day, they see a lot of this land that Okura owns or that other private landowners own that aren't a part of their group, and they would love to figure out a way to align, because that would create the maximum windfall. Okay, they can go ahead and start building right now if they would, but they really want to do the best deal. Okay, and that's what I believe is making them. It's important for us to know is why they are even open to conversations. And so I would say this would be very important to know, because they need to be a part of this dialogue. And honestly, we're happy the fact that they were like, yeah, we want to be a part of it, because they don't have to come to these meetings. And I forget what day are they supposed to begin to join us? Is it 19th of March? March 19th. So March 19th, some of the most influential people in these groups are going to be in these meetings. So just begin to prepare your mind and your thought process on, okay, they're going to be in the room, and guys, just don't miss that moment. So this room is going to be a table, and for the first time, they're going to be talking to us about reimagining something. Does that make sense? Many plans fail due to lack of counsel. Many plans fail due to the wrong people, the right people not being in the room. Some of the mistakes that they've made in the past, and they've made some mistakes, and we've had conversations about those mistakes, is because they didn't know. Now, that could be debatable. However, me asking some very pointed questions like, why did you do that? And they said, well, because it made me money. I'm like, okay, that makes sense. Well, let me explain to you why that didn't make sense to me. And that conversation probably took 3 or 4 different meetings for them to really understand a different perspective that wasn't their own, because they didn't have that experience in life. They just had a completely different experience. And so at the end of the day, to have a group of people that want and have the ability to build their own thing, we now have an opportunity to get their buy-in to collaborate. Okay, that would be the most important thing that I would want to leave us today, is thinking this. We can't get done what we would all like to get done without the buy-in and collaboration of all the people that own this land. So we want to make sure that we engage in a way that's going to make them want to be at the table with us. Does that make sense? I love some of the language you used earlier. Sometimes that means I can't say what I want to say. I got to say it differently, and sometimes at a different time, to make sure that I keep my seat at the table to influence the long game. Y'all tracking with that? Are y'all understanding what I'm saying? So I'm looking forward to more conversations together that we'll have as a group to figure out, okay, how do we leverage all these different gifts, talents, and experiences and expertise in a way to form a new partnership that the right people can be in the room at the right time to make the right decision, so that this part of town can truly be reimagined, not just in a plan, but also in execution.
And I would just add, really quick,
Okay.
I would just want to add
Please.
what might be very beneficial for this group, as well as those who are
Online.
doing it.
Okay.
And I don't know how you would facilitate it, but before that conversation, it may be well time spent to really sort of, again, we have not engaged or really talked about the development process.
Good.
Development itself. How and why developers make the decisions that they make. It has, by and large, a lot of it has to do with the price of the land. What they purchased that land for. Now, it's debatable that all of that land that has been acquired, especially if it was acquired very early on, it was probably acquired very inexpensive. If it has been acquired much later, as people have become more aware and more sophisticated about what's going on, if that land has been acquired at higher dollars, that impacts what you should or can do on that property. And just to break that down very simply, a piece of land you may not be able to do a single family home, just for instance, because the cost of the construction plus the cost of the land will not allow you to reach the best benefit from it. Unless, the only way that is unless you are doing it yourself. It's your land, you're developing it, and you decide to develop at a particular cost because you could afford that mortgage, you're gonna live in that house for the next 30, 40 years, then it may not matter. But if you are a merchant developer and you make your living by developing and for leasing and for selling, reselling, all market conditions, market caps, at some point, you just can't keep going, like I pay this much for the land, it costs me this much to develop it, and I can just keep adding my margin onto it. At some point, your margin says, the cost of the land is this, the cost of development is this, your margin is what has to fluctuate, because at some point, the market is gonna say, you cannot go above this.
Agreed.
You're not going to be able to sell this or lease this for above this amount. And so what happens? Something's got to give. And if land is not given and construction is not given, what's giving is how much money you make on it. And so if you are a merchant developer and you're looking to make a certain percentage, even by need, I mean, it just doesn't make sense. You make a decision that this is not a deal I can do. You know, if it's not, if I can't make X amount of dollars on it, it's not a deal I can do. That's where all of the subsidies and things like that come in to begin to help close some of those gaps, ensure that some of those margins are realized, etc. So I just think that it's important to have that paradigm understanding before we go into these conversations with developers, so that you are able to dialogue with them intelligently. You're not coming, let's lower that learning curve so that when you sit at the table and they're talking, because we're gonna have to say to them, all right, stop using that language. Bring it down where we are so we understand what you're talking about. Because there's a whole industry that uses language that we are not necessarily privy to. And if they say programming, we might be thinking what's gonna happen, at the dance, and they may be talking about something totally different. So it's just important to have that. And I know her well.
That's really good, okay? Like, I just, every time Gia talks, I'm like, I'm listening, I learn every time. I know we're out of time on this particular segment. I gotta turn it over to Vanessa. Vanessa, obviously you can do whatever you want to at the time. But thank you guys again for this dialogue. I'm looking forward to more conversations on what our next steps should be as we begin to engage with these private stakeholders. Because you're right, we need to have more conversation and continue to prepare our minds on what do we want from them. We gotta be able to answer that question. So thank you so much. Vanessa, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Elaine, for helping us facilitate the conversation. A lot of great food. I was trying to capture some of that on the dry erase board as well, but thank you all for just having that process and thinking through this with us and how we can do this in a way that is thoughtfully and intentionally done. So moving on, how are you guys feeling? Do we need a quick break or are we good to keep going? Anybody need to take a quick break? We're good? Okay. Maybe we'll take a break after this next segment. Okay, to live stream. So I'm gonna invite Christina Beatty. Yeah, we're gonna get the live stream going. And I'm gonna invite Christina Beatty to come and share about culture and aesthetics. She is a cultural planner and producer that has a lot of experience thinking about space from a cultural perspective and how identities and experiences connect people's spaces. So we're gonna hear from her and get this live stream going. But I'm gonna turn it on.
That cord is a mess.
You all, do you want to take a quick break? Because it might take a minute or two for us to set this up. Feel free to use the restroom. The restroom is right up here across the hall. We have water. So take care of yourselves and we'll get started in a second.
Would you like me to do something? She said,
Okay, everyone. I think we're still waiting for a few folks to make it back into the room. Testing, testing. Testing, testing. That's fine. Okay. All right, everyone. Good morning, good morning, good morning. My name is Christina Beatty, and I am really excited to delve into this next subject. You know, we really have so many different things to address in this whole process. And so thank you, Dwayne, so much for facilitating that conversation. Thank you, everyone, for your feedback. And I just am really excited to shift gears a little bit and have a conversation that I know many of us have been waiting to have throughout this whole process. Again, my name is Christina Beatty, and I am a cultural planner and producer. You'll see a slide in just a minute that will speak a little bit more to what I do full time these days, but just really excited to think about, let's see. Make sure I'm advancing this correctly.
Just click it.
Just click.
Is there like one?
Okay.
No. It's working.
There, okay, perfect. All right, so I think this is really the question that many of us have been waiting to get to. You know, this is our last reflection and education session before we begin to move into the visioning and design period of the process. And so this is really an opportunity for us to be thinking about how, as we really begin to design, draw, vision, put things on paper, create an actual tangible plan. How can we apply all of the things that we have talked about together? How can we move forward in this process and make sure that local history and culture are reflected when we are imagining new development? And I want to say that it's equally important, you know, we really have spoken a lot in this process about the history of the area and wanting to honor that. We also want to be sure that we are thinking really clearly about what are the current needs, who are the people that live here right now, who are the people that are interested in being a part of new development and dreaming about the future. And so how can we move through this process in a way that creates a sense of place that is authentic, unique, and reflects not only history, but also current culture? Okay, so the first thing I want to talk about is intentional design. And this is one of my favorite architectural examples to discuss. This is the First Americans Museum that just opened this fall right here in Oklahoma City. And the idea here really is that good design can really bake history and culture into the architecture without viewers even knowing what they are looking at. And so this is just one of the most intentional spaces that I have ever been in personally. And it's the kind of thing that you can just feel when you're there. This is a space that obviously has a very huge job to do, telling the story of the 39 federally recognized tribes that are headquartered here in the state of Oklahoma.
And I really hope we get these pictures back because they're amazing to look at. But there's so much intentionality. If you ever have the opportunity to go on a tour, they also have interpretive material just posted on signs. The building itself, the fact that it's situated on a river that has really specific meaning, it's constructed as, it's constructed in a way that honors mound building culture, because many of the tribes that are located here have a connection to that historically. It's constructed in a way that the entrance face is east to greet the sun as it rises in the morning. It's constructed and it's situated, the site is situated so you can see there are tunnels and there are mounds. It's even situated in a way that the sun literally sets in the middle of that tunnel or atop that mound on the summer and winter solstices. The level of intentionality, and also harkening back to some of those other things that we've discussed in terms of ecology and being connected to nature. These are really great examples of ways that you can do that. Obviously, this is a much larger scale project than what we are likely to see in our area, but one of my favorite examples is also on this image. Again, I'm always bad at the stage left, stage right, but I think on your right, the smaller image is of the Hall. I think it's called the Hall of Americas, but it has these 10 arched beams. So you can kind of see the way that those beams are curved. The 10 arched beams, and this is just so powerful, but it's also so simple. They represent the 10 miles a day that Native Americans were forced to march during forced removal. And so, again, that's just a really simple but powerful way to think about how design can reflect history and culture, how it can celebrate survival, how it can be honoring of the past and give us a real sense of place in the present. Okay, so I mentioned I'll get to what I do on a daily basis. So my full-time work these days, I work with the Freedom Center and working towards the development of the Claire Luper Civil Rights Center. It is one of the 16 MAP-4 projects. And what's shown here are images that were developed, really just conceptual drawings, but they were developed for the MAP-4 campaign back in 2019. And we had an excellent architectural partner in Baucus Payne. And there are a couple things I want to call your attention here too. So in the first image, you'll see just kind of the layout of the full campus, but you'll notice that the two largest buildings are on really specific angles. They're on a 58 and 64 degree angles. Quick Black History lesson, right? It's February still. So that was very intentional because the first sit-in in Oklahoma City happened August 19th, 1958. So the 58 degree angle is in celebration of that. The sit-in movement here in Oklahoma City really continued until the passage of the Federal Civil Rights Act, which is in 1964. And so that's what the angle of those buildings represents. Again, not super overt, but very powerful, and just is a way to think about how can we be really intentional and purposeful in making even simple decisions about how, how a building is positioned on the land. Similarly, the image on the right shows the interior, and you'll see that there are kind of inverted skylights, right? And that is because Claire Luper was well known for many years for calling her children her diamonds. She was an educator, she was a teacher. I have spoken to folks who were students of hers in the classroom, as well as folks who were a part of the NAACP Youth Council. And I've heard Black folks, white folks, everybody say, she called her children her diamonds. And so that is something that we wanted to reflect here in this design. So another strategy to really reflect on local history and new development is to make architectural choices that are in tune with the existing design character in the area. And this was really the idea when Okura created the Northeast Residential Design Standards. They initially created these in 2015. And I do want to make a point that much of our area, obviously there's very little housing left, right? And so these design standards were actually created looking at the neighboring Culberson East Highland neighborhood and looking at the existing stock in that area. So it certainly still references the broader neighboring communities. But these design standards did come from existing housing styles in the Culberson East Highlands neighborhood. I do also want to point out that this guide speaks specifically to single family residential housing. It doesn't speak to multifamily, it doesn't speak to commercial. However, it really is an excellent example of how we can think about the history and historical context of architectural style as we're making new decisions. And so this is just something for us to consider as we move forward and think about what we want to see in our study area. Okay, so the full pattern book is available online. You can share that. And I know many of our tactical committee members are very familiar with it, but we're happy to share that. It is available on Okura's website. The whole thing is about 80 pages long. And so I'm just gonna pull a couple of examples here and show these diagrams that demonstrate the level of detail really that they're looking at in terms of different architectural features. And so this first style that we're looking at here is the Craftsman Cottage. And you'll see that there really is a lot of detail here looking at the roof style and pitch, looking at symmetry, looking at porch size. They're really just looking at all the different kind of design and architectural features of this particular style of home. Again, we're only going to look at a couple of different styles. There are many more featured in the pattern book. Let's see. And then they kind of go into looking at more of the materiality, what materials are used in the building process, more fine style details, looking at windows, doors. Are we talking about brick, siding, stone? What is the styling above the eaves? There's really a lot of detail included here. And I'll also say, the beginning of the pattern book is really interesting in terms of learning about developers in the area over time and like when development began to happen, what were the different economic forces happening at the time, how patterns have shifted over time. Okay, so just to show a slightly different type of housing, this is the Tudor Revival. It's very distinctive. It has a more dramatically sloped roof. Porch and columns are integrated, so you see kind of a more flat facade with the Tudor homes. And these styles really are exclusively brick or stone. There might be, some other materials above the eaves, but shutters are not used on the windows. Chimneys are encouraged as a strong design feature. This is, again, just kind of an example to look at. And so really the point of this is we only really looked at two. There are 6 categories that are kind of broken out that way, and even more in the beginning of the pattern book. But this map shows property by property. They've gone through and demonstrated each of these colors represents a different style. And so the point really is, as you are making decisions about development, that you're looking at what styles exist around you. and that you are being thoughtful about that in terms of just being respectful of the existing architecture. Again, it was originally published in 2015. Obviously, a lot has changed even since then. And the pattern book has been updated to include some additional information since that time. Okay, so architectural choices are one of really many ways that we can think about prioritizing local history and culture. Another huge priority for this project, obviously, is we think specifically about the 4th Street corridor, but also about what mixed use can look like throughout the area, is really celebrating and reviving the legacy of thriving Black commerce. And so there's a few images here: the original Florence's restaurant, Leora's Beauty Salon, Walker Furniture and Variety. I guess word has it that was the Walmart in the heyday of Deep Deuce. And the Morgan Building, which housed many different businesses. You know, one thing that was really interesting as we talk about development and who participates in the development process, you really have many of these buildings that are named, right? Like the Morgan Building, another building a lot of people connected to that we don't have anymore is the Finley Building. A lot of times these were folks who were professionals, doctors, lawyers, but they also really contributed to developing the community, and they were the developers, right? And then they housed all these other businesses, and they were able to help build an economy in that way, because as the result of their professional living, they were able to contribute to the community in a more broad way. And so what do we think, how do we think about bringing that spirit back as we move forward? One opportunity is really being intentional in terms of recruitment, thinking about recruiting Black business owners, thinking about the mix of basic needs and special experiences. I think, you know, we have a lot to be thoughtful about and needing to be realistic about, right? Understanding the way that retail has changed over the years. You know, influenced heavily, obviously, by online commerce, and then the pandemic hit. And so, but one thing that we can think about is, and we've talked somewhat before, you know, experiences are things that you can't get just online. Having an experience-based economy, experience-based businesses, also services, are things that you really have to do in person. And so I've included several different examples here. Also, again, pointing to basic needs. You know, we've heard throughout this process, we need basic things like pharmacies, hardware stores. How are we able to meet our own needs in our own community the way that we used to be able to do? And so I think a lot of times, you know, at this phase, because of the way we've seen development happen all over the city, you know, things like hardware stores and even pharmacies we think about typically on a much larger scale. It doesn't have to be. You know, those things can be built on a neighborhood scale as well. Those things can be integrated, you know, into mixed use developments. I've included also some images of local Black businesses, both here and in Tulsa. And a little bit, Deborah's gonna share some more about Fulton Street Books and Coffee, that's in Tulsa. One of the images included here is the Wild Mother, which is a local Black florist here in Oklahoma City. They're currently located in Film Row. One of the conversations I know we've had with folks in the room is the desire really to see entertainment come back as part of the lifeblood of the community. And so this is an image of Duet Jazz Club in Tulsa. And then beyond kind of thinking about traditional commercial and residential spaces, another way really to, you know, create a sense of place, to leave a mark and a cultural stamp And also just to have really amazing experiences is thinking about what kinds of arts and cultural activity do we want to see in the area. And for the purposes of this project, you know, what's really important to think about is what spaces are needed to accommodate that kind of activity. Also, it's important to think about what partnerships would be required to make these things feasible. Thinking about partnering with our existing arts institutions, how do we, to the point that was made earlier, how do we create opportunities to make sure that these projects can be well-funded and sustainable over time? Obviously, we are really lucky to have existing assets in the area, and I've included images of Booker T. Washington Park and festival activity that already happens there. This image is from last year's One OKC Festival. And then also having the auditorium at the Douglas as a performance space, you know, and the dance performance featured there. These are really great existing assets. So it's also important to think about, we don't want to duplicate what can be complementary. As we think about visual and performing arts, as we think about digital and new media arts, you know, and maybe tying that into themes with the Innovation District, into themes, new media and things with film and digital theater. What are complementary spaces that don't already exist, maybe of different scales? What about private studio space for artists, current artists, to produce new work? What about galleries or performance venues for artists to share their work once it has been produced? What about arts education activities? So really just being creative and thinking, you know, in addition to the residential and commercial in a traditional sense, what other types of activities do we really want to see accommodated that allow for celebration of culture today? And the last section I really want to talk about is public art. And I looked long and hard and thought about this to really show some interesting and different examples. Public art really can tell stories that reflect existing culture, ecology. They can also become a new iconic feature that redefines the landscape for the future. Public art can be short-term or long-term. Some of these examples are traveling. They may not necessarily be permanently installed. They can also be indoor or outdoor. A lot of times we think about public art strictly as outdoor, but you can have public art in indoor space, public spaces as well. And then certainly there are lots of things to think about in terms of, you know, is it interactive? Is it static? Can people touch it? Can they not touch it? Is it high tech? Is it low tech? Thinking about durability of materials, thinking about maintenance over time. There's lots of different options. And so just to speak through these examples that I selected here, the first one is called, of course I scrolled too far too fast. The first one is called White Light, and it's by Paul Coxage Studio. And so this is the indoor work that you see installed on the ceiling, just to have an example of an indoor work. The next two images that I selected intentionally was kind of more of a high-tech and a low-tech version of really speaking to the local ecology. And so the kind of illuminated pillars coming out of the ground, that's called Tall Grasses. That's by Oklahoma-based artist Jeffrey Hicks. He's actually based in Tulsa. But this is, as you can imagine, you know, it requires electricity, a different level of maintenance. This is a project that tends to travel, isn't necessarily installed in one place, you know, for the duration, but it still speaks wherever it goes to Oklahoma's tall grass ecology. Similarly, the image directly below that is called Aluminum Yucca by Gordon Quayther. This is installed, I believe, in New Mexico. Obviously, this is lower tech, it's more durable materials, and also thinking about things like cost. This to me is a really beautiful example of using salvage materials. Looking at that, I wouldn't have assumed that that was made of salvage materials. It's actually salvage aluminum fuel tanks from F-16 military aircraft. And, you know, so again, I want us to both kind of dream big and think about all the possibilities, and also understand that there are ways to do things that can be more cost effective and still be beautiful and indicative of the community. Okay, the other image in the top corner there is called The Stars Pull Down for Real by Robert Montgomery. This is another piece that has traveled. This image is taken when it was installed at Oklahoma Contemporary. And I just wanted to include an example of what kinds of words, right, might we want to make room for in a space? What declarations might we want to see happen? And so that's just one example of what that can look like. It is light work, but it's pretty simple. It's just kind of on a scaffolding, and it's just kind of neon bulbs, and yeah, it's a pretty straightforward installation. The last example shown here is Nelson Mandela by Marco Cianfanelli. This is installed in South Africa. And I wanted to include something that was kind of both abstracted and figurative, right? Like, this is obviously immediately recognizable as Nelson Mandela, but the way that they have executed it in terms of each of those vertical pieces being, I'm not even necessarily going to have the right words, but each of those vertical pieces coming together to make that image is, to me, just a really creative example of how we can do things in a way that honor, you know, significant individuals, but in a different way. And when I looked at it, you know, obviously this is a whole huge different scale, but given that kind of essentially black and white gradient, it reminded me much of the sign that wraps around Culture Coffee and the way that those spaces are integrated.
This, I think, is a reticulum, which probably has the effect of you being able to, well, you might be able, I'm not sure, but as you walk.
Yeah, it's going to change as you walk past.
It changes. Okay, so it's lenticular work, and it's very striking, but at the same time, not as difficult. It can be very inexpensive to implement.
Okay, so again, I really just wanted to show some different ways that we can really think about imbuing culture in every element of our vision moving forward. As we move into the design phase, we have lots of things to consider. I wanted to end on this image just because ultimately culture is about people. Community is about people. We want to design spaces that are people friendly. We want to design spaces that are affirming and that are good for right now, that honor the past, and also that are looking forward to the future. So I will turn it over to Deborah.
Make sure you see her that can see you.
All right, I am an architect and urban designer, and I'm going to talk a little bit about architectural concepts and how they can manifest in design and built form. So when we think of architectural concepts, like, what does that mean? That may mean like the project goals and in kind of a broad sense. And it's kind of the driving force behind all of the different decisions that you make in the building And it helps your building look cohesive and kind of align with maybe whatever your project goals are. So here's some examples. Building and land use to inform the design, right? So if I have a library, what is kind of the activities inside that might affect the shape and development of that building? Culture and history to inform design. I have some examples of some new movements that are in practice right now, like hip hop design and design that has been inspired by jazz, right? So if you're taking that idea and thinking about how that might inform the built form, what would that look like? Lifestyle and climate to inform design. A lot of vernacular architecture, older architecture, more historic societies, their architecture is heavily influenced by the climate that they're in and the local materials. So if that's a goal of yours, thinking about climate and local materials, what does that mean for your building? And then finally, affordability and participation. So if a main goal of your project is affordability and convening people and understanding their desires about the project, how might that affect your design outcomes? Okay, so the first is building use and land use to inform design. This is Fulton Street Books and Coffee, and it's in Tulsa. What's really interesting about this project, and we're going to go to the next slide so you can, that's the outside. This was an existing kind of older building on the site. But the interior is two-part. It's a bookstore and a coffee shop. And this is about use and building use. So Onika is the owner of this bookstore. 70% of the books are written by or featuring POC or marginalized communities, authors, or stories. And she also has a lot of programming in this space that expands the idea of what literacy might mean for the community. So there's a certain population that may not have a high school diploma, and kind of reinforcing education and advanced literacy through her programming in this space. And it's directly connected to the coffee shop. So this is also kind of a space to convene and meet. And the two sides have design aesthetics that are similar and complementary and kind of open up to each other. This is at a much different scale, a much bigger building, but I want to show it because it's one of the buildings that has really influenced design. And this is the Seattle Public Library. What's really interesting about this project is that historically, you guys are familiar that bookstores or libraries are many stacks of books. And as time has passed, that has changed, where people don't spend a lot of time in the stacks. Libraries are actually being used as a convening space, educational space, learning space. So the form of this building was designed to totally change and reimagine what would the space of a library look like. So you actually see on the left here images of these blocks where there might be some stacks or programming, but in between those blocks is open space so that people have the ability to see each other, connect when they look out over balconies, or even when they're in the stacks, to see those shared spaces that exist above and below. So starting to connect the space and create a more social and educational space. I'm going to move on to culture and history to inform design. So many of you guys, some of you guys may be familiar with this project. So this is Project Row Houses in the 3rd Ward in Houston, and it was led by Rick Lowe, but it was a project that many people came together on, a discussion between many Black artists in Houston's 3rd Ward to start to think about what might be done in this space. So originally, activists and residents in the area saw these abandoned shotgun style houses and thought these are kind of in the worst condition in this neighborhood, and they should probably be demolished. And in addition, they also connotated imagery and memories that people felt were not very positive for the neighborhood. Rick and the group that he was working with wanted to kind of think about and make sure that that was kind of the right strategy. So through Rick's process of looking around and researching, he made the connection that the works of the artist John Biggers, who did a lot of painting of shotgun houses, he kind of traced the way that the artist was looking at the shotgun houses, and the old narrative, and the one that the people in the community, their reasoning for tearing them down, the old narrative was that they often served as slave quarters and had other negative connotations. But John Biggers had traced the root and origin of the house to West Africa and showed how it moved along with the slave trade to the West Indies and the southern parts of the US. And Rick thought that this narrative was something that that could be built upon to create a different narrative that could affect how a lot of people in the community or people living in these shotgun style houses might think of the spaces that they live in. So this was sort of a starting point for that project. So now the idea was to renovate these houses instead of tear them down. And there was also an ambition to create a social space. It's not just about architecture, but about the activities and land use that come together with it. So there were 22 of these shotgun houses. And Rick and the other artists that he's working with thought, how could we create an environment of care and prosperity and culture within these spaces? So number one was the importance of the architecture itself. Number two was art, creativity, and culture. Number three was thinking about education. And number four was thinking about a safety net, a social safety net for people. So the first thing was to restore the architecture, show the beauty of the architecture. And 8 of the 22 houses were dedicated to revolving exhibition space for artists and creative thinkers. Several outdoor spaces and other interior spaces were dedicated to educational activities. And then the 7 remaining houses, he wanted to specifically think about how the community could help each other and support each other. So the 7 remaining houses were dedicated to single mothers to create a housing environment that spoke symbolically to how we should treat each other, and especially those who may be struggling in the community. So the first step was to kind of restore the historic houses, which you see on the left. And then the project continued to grow. So now you can see on the right some of the new houses that were inspired by the old houses, but are more contemporary and modern and look different. They also really prioritize the connection to the public space, which you see people sitting outside and kind of creating a sense of community and communal space. Unfortunately, with all this positive development in the area, there was a lot of speculation and new development where people were not thinking about the history and the connection and the scale of the neighborhood. So it's not necessarily that you couldn't have more development, but thinking about how the scale might, be appropriate to what was currently there. So now here you see these houses, some of the smaller houses that are there, and then these giant buildings that are built up next to them. So Project Row Houses responded by trying to show more and more models of architecture that could fit into the context, that may be contemporary, but also spoke to the language of design that was in the area. All right, I'm gonna switch gears to something that's a little bit more conceptual, and that's kind of part of a newer movement. This project is Hip Hop Fabrications in Public Space by Sekou Cook. Hip hop architecture looks at thinking about inspiration from hip hop, mixing spaces and styles, and thinking about individual agency and expression over one's environment. So minority communities, and especially the Black community, was often formed in urban spaces that were underinvested and under-designed by municipalities or the city governments. From these spaces, some of the most valuable cultural contributions arose, including blues, jazz, and hip hop. Instead of being defined by these kind of banal environments or oppressive environments, there is, a really thriving culture, again, through music, art, a variety of modes. So in architecture, what you see is that the porch, the hallway, the stoop, the corner, some of these public spaces, or some of these urban spaces actually became part of the public space and took on new meaning. So this is a specific project proposal that was in response to the Syracuse Housing Authority that planned to tear down some of the housing projects called Pioneer Homes. And Sekou Cook asked the question, well, instead of displacing people again and moving them to another area, we understand that these housing projects need a lot of improvement. So what if you improve the quality of those buildings and then added and subtracted geometries and spaces to those buildings and mixed in culturally appropriate art and other materials to start to make these spaces much more interesting and alive and allow people to stay where they are in the community. And in some of these images, you see also a desire to create that public space and that public corner and kind of expand that. And then also other shared ideas of the porch, where we might have shared porches that are kind of oversized, where a bunch of apartment units might feed into. So again, this is kind of a new move. Well, it's not that new of a movement. He's one of many people working in this mode, but there hasn't been that much built architecture that's kind of in alignment, but a lot of people working on this idea. There are other architects and designers working with the idea of jazz, improvisation, and architecture. So one example is David Brown, and he was the director of the Chicago Biennale that happens every couple of years. And in 2021, he was the director of it. In his project, the available city, which we see on the right, he explored 13,000 vacant lots that are in Chicago to propose publicly accessible collective space in which there's either a small building or sort of a park type space that is either for a nonprofit or a public good that people kind of share collectively. And then you see, like, it's a little bit hard to see, but the uncolored spaces are kind of the existing urban fabric. And he imagined how different forms and building forms might encourage different types of activities. Is it a space to congregate? Is it a space for reflection, where there might be individual spaces that are sort of isolated and quiet? And the idea is to provide different kind of types of spaces for improvisation, for activities in the built environment. This is another project that was done as part of this bigger exhibition. And it's the Central Park Theater in North Lawndale project by Manuel Hertz Architects. And what you see here is this existing theater, and what's painted on the walls is both reflective of actually the architectural form, because you see the fire escapes and existing doors. So it's reflective of that form that's already on the building. And then there's also imagery of neighboring houses and people and different other cultural elements that reflect what had been there in the past. So what we can even imagine for the space south of 8 is that there was a specific kind of rhythm to the architecture that we no longer see there. But there's a lot of documentation of what was there. We can imagine traces of those rhythms showing up in new buildings. Not that the new buildings are the same size necessarily as the buildings that were there previously, but there's kind of like a rhythm and a breaking down of, if they're a larger building, a larger massing to kind of reflect those older rhythms that may be smaller and kind of neighborhood appropriate. All right, lifestyle and climate to inspire urban and architectural design. So this is an affordable housing project in LA that is both environmentally friendly and economically sustainable. The design clusters economical, repeatable housing blocks around a canopy of existing shade trees and also additional shade elements, which are kind of these overhangs with wood slats. The project has a green roof and encourages outdoor activity to promote health and well-being. That is it. And the buildings are, again, encircling a courtyard, which I'll show a picture of here. There's also a couple of community rooms in the building, which open up onto these courtyards to create a safe space for children playing or for educational purposes. And there's other sustainable features such as what's at the green roof, the window frames on the building, which are reducing solar heat gain into the spaces and providing shading. There's also a large cistern. There's solar, there's some solar panels on this project. And there's a vegetative screen wall that insulates and reflects noise. In addition, apparently, there's some units here that they were able to design in such a way to actually have passive cooling, so they don't have AC units in them. Yes.
What's a green roof?
Okay, so yeah, so a green roof is on top of your flat roof. There's many ways to build it out, but you're basically going to have soil and plants right on top of your building. And it's a great insulator, number one. And then also there's so the building tops actually absorb a lot of heat from the sun, and it makes the city environment hotter. And so if you have plants up there, your total environment can also be cooler. And it's a great insulator for the building as well. Yes, Gina?
And I just, talking about, and I'm not thinking about her.
Gina, if you're gonna talk for a while, I wanna give you a mic because
No, I'm
it
not
needs to
talking
be
about-
on.
all I'm gonna say is that in Oklahoma, okay, I don't think that we have thought enough about green architecture.
Just
We're
give her the
starting to, but we haven't done it enough. And specifically because we are an environment that has traditionally been considered tornado alley. And when you think about what Deborah is saying about, you know,
The impacts that building and construction has on the overall environment in terms of creating heat islands and things like that. because we're adding more concrete. In Oklahoma, permeable concrete does not work very well because of our soil, I'm understanding. And so there are some limitations to what we can do. So we really should be thinking about incorporating green architecture within our new buildings, because that may be one of the only ways we get to mitigate the perfect storm. I mean, we cannot deny that climate change is impacting our weather patterns. It's even maybe potentially changing what was traditionally known as Tornado Alley. But we're still, I think no one has said, okay, it's definitely changing. But when you look at the weather, you look at all of the factors that have to come into play to make an F4 tornado, for instance. Well, surface temperature at the ground level is one of those things. It needs to be hot here. And what can we do to mitigate that? Typically, development goes in, erases the landscape. In other words, we grub up all the trees, all of the mature trees. And while we have landscape points now, and we can utilize those landscape points and hopefully maybe even get more robust landscape points, uprooting a mature tree is, to me, a sin. Okay, I mean, it's just a sin. And so, because you cannot accomplish from a new tree what you can accomplish from a mature tree. Or if our landscape points say, if you have to uproot a mature tree, how many new trees must you put back to equal what that mature tree does? This could actually be our only or most impactful way of mitigating or cooling down our atmosphere so that the perfect storm cannot exist in our area. I mean, I think there's still a lot of study to that most researchers, especially meteorologists, would probably say we have to study, but I just know, I mean, it doesn't take a rocket science. You just start putting all of these things together and you say, well, okay, this creates heat. The hotter this gets, in addition to the climate change issues that we're experiencing, we're contributing to ultimately a clash of dynamics here that we get more robust tornadoes. So we should be planning all of this to say, we should be doing green roofs, we should be planting trees in a very robust way. And in our community, unfortunately, sometimes we don't realize the importance of that. We cut down trees in a minute.
Yeah, Vera had a question.
I just want to make a comment.
Yeah.
Back in the 70s, when they remodeled our center, the Henrietta B. Foster Center, they received, the late 70s, early 80s, they received a $70,000 grant to put in a green roof. And so they did have part of it as a green roof, and it was operated on solar and so on and so forth. So that was back in the 80s that they did that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, some of these technologies and these ideas have definitely been around for a while, and that's great to hear.
And I just want one real add-on. Gina talked about the communal good, like stopping that, major event that might occur. But there's also personal benefit, right? Because you put that stuff on your rooftop, you're gonna have lower energy bills. So it's all connected. And I just wanted to reinforce that.
Yeah, no, that all is great information. And on this project too, there were some of those existing trees that were in the center that I think in this image, we're seeing some of the smaller ones, but there's also existing ones on the property that they chose to keep, which is also part of the reason why you see the overall shape of the building being a little bit irregular. No, why I'm not getting through here. Okay, these are a couple of other projects that have been the design has been heavily influenced by sustainability. So this is the Marine Education Center in Ocean Springs, Mississippi by Lake Flato. The project was designed for climate change after Hurricane Katrina demolished the previous center. The educational facility includes outdoor classrooms, laboratories, offices, assembly spaces. The main building is sited within an existing tree canopy, allowing the trees to serve as a natural wind buffer. Oops. Sorry. And also the form of the building takes a lot of inspiration from local architecture as far as creating breezeways and open exterior porches. So here you see a lot of outdoor spaces where there's activities that are just created through kind of large overhangs, exterior porches and spaces for people to spend a lot of time outdoors. And this project is also a net zero project, meaning that they don't, they only use the energy that they're making on their grounds in this case. This is a really beautiful project by Francis Carey Architecture. It's actually in Burkina Faso. And it's a primary school. And the main kind of aesthetic quality of the space is coming from a double roof that they have. And this is all for passive cooling. So it gets really hot on the roof and it's forcing the air below to move up into that double space and create air circulation. This project was also very participatory. People in the community worked on the project and were trained in construction methods to help work on the project. And it was made from local materials. So these are some images of those spaces. And again, you can see kind of like the participation happening here. Want to look at a few more ideas about affordability and participation to inform design. This is a unique project. These were made very inexpensively. This is actually in Chile and it's called a half a good house. And the idea was that a lot of people that were low income were just getting these very small houses. That was kind of how they were resolving. If you have low income, then you have a small house. And the architect thought maybe there's another way. Like if we space out the main components of the building that are the most expensive, like the kitchen and a bathroom, and build those, allow people to move in, that then over time, they can kind of construct or add on to their house as they might have more means to do so. And what's also interesting is that Sanku Cook actually cites this project as an idea of hip hop architecture because of the participatory quality and the improvisation and mixing that's happening here when you have something that's kind of, well, first kind of fully designed modular, and then when people come in and add on their own spaces. This is a project by Rural Studio in Alabama, and they do a lot of work in rural areas in Alabama. It's not directly in alignment with our context in a denser area, but what's really interesting about this project is that they're looking at sustainability goals for the project. And what they realize is it's really hard to achieve for affordable housing and for people at lower income levels, because there's an upfront cost to some like better insulation or better materials. And so they're actually partnering with Wells Fargo and Fannie Mae to look at changing the mortgage structure, because they believe that the mortgage company should understand that the cost for these individuals is going to be lower because they're paying lower utilities. So you shouldn't just, the traditional way of looking at the mortgage structure should be changed. And that would allow people to actually afford to buy these houses and get a mortgage at a different rate. Finally, this is Cherry Street Pier by ISA in Philadelphia. And I also want to think a little bit about how design might be affected by thinking about participation and startup businesses. So there's, this is a pier that's been kind of designed with a bunch of pop-up shops and flexible spaces, and they kind of have some permanent tenants, but also rotating tenants. And that design quality also affects the aesthetic of the space and provides opportunity for people to participate. And I'm sure you guys have also seen food truck parks and things like that. So just thinking about the temporal aspect of land use and how that may encourage young businesses and to have opportunities to engage in building the community. So I think all of those architectural examples are very varied in style. And one thing that I want to kind of think about is that it's kind of the good architecture and design comes from a strong concept and strong goals, and is not necessarily part of a specific style of architecture. You know, we can imagine that here's the all of these images on the right have the same number of units, but the form of it is all very different. So when you're thinking about, and you do want to take context into place when you're thinking about context, especially our context, you might think that the lower right hand, you know, image is the one that's most reflective of the neighborhood. But there's so many different ways to think about the form and the urban space. So being kind of, so you do need to be cognizant of the context, but also of the project goals. And thinking about scale again, and in relationship to context, but not necessarily architectural style. So this, the affordable housing project that I showed, this is like zoomed out a little bit where you can see the street. And you can also see that the building is not very overbearing on the streetscape. It's LA, we can't totally see some of the other buildings a little bit more spread out. But we also see a project, a new row house in Toronto that's a modern brick house next to adjacent historic houses, also not overbearing on the streetscape because it's reflective of the scale of the other buildings that are there. And then I just wanted to throw in again that this image for Project Row Houses, I mean, these buildings right here on the right look to be 3 stories. Well, in the image on the left, those are 2 stories, but I could even imagine some of those houses could have 3 stories and not be overbearing on the urban space, right? So again, it's not necessarily about the height, but the way that the design team has considered the context and the form to reflect what is there or what the, you know, what is desired. Okay, and that's all I have. Do you want to, what we have
Oh,
here?
we do have a question from Ashley.
Okay.
Ashley said that the examples are great and thoughtful. One of the reasons developers state they don't build this way is that it is cost prohibitive. Is that true? And can you speak more about innovative design as it relates to cost?
Yeah, so I always talk to people about you can have cost, speed, and design as 3 issues, and you can't have them all. So if you are asking a designer to come up with something that is low cost and appropriate for the community, it's going to take more time because that's a hard question to answer. So I would just say that, yes, you can have it, but it may take more time, more collaboration, more partners to achieve that. And one of the reasons why you see things like this is because this was fast and cost effective.
Well, and especially in regards to like green design, I feel like sometimes there is an upfront cost that people don't understand, but they also don't understand the long-term savings that they're gonna get from using those products. And so, yes, developers will sometimes tell you that those are cost prohibitive, but they're not taking into consideration the energy savings, the health savings that you're gonna make on your life and the people around you. So I think when people tell you those things, we need to be more mindful to do research to understand why they're saying it's cost prohibitive and what type of impact it can have on us, not just our pockets, but our well-being also.
Yeah, that's a very good point, Erin. And even when you look at this image over here on the screen, in the long term, it's actually more economically beneficial to build at a scale appropriate to what is there, or a style that's kind of reflective or tie into the existing community, because people like those spaces better. So maybe the developer sold their units immediately and felt good about that, but long-term, it's kind of detrimental to the economic and cultural activity in the neighborhood.
So can I just say this too, in terms of everything that we have talked about and bringing it down to where we are and how you might be able to translate some of this information into something
That's tangible that Okura can actually use, right? So let's say, for instance, you walk away and in your visioning process, you decide that you do want green infrastructure to be included within Okura's RFP process. What that might mean for a developer is, based on what Deborah just talked about in terms of time and cost effectiveness, et cetera, what that might translate to is that a developer may need a subsidy to make that happen, to make that a reality, because he's got so much money that he can use. His equity partners are looking for an internal rate of return. There are all of these other money or number issues that have to pencil out to be able to attract, let's say, for instance, to be able to attract the equity partner. And if the equity partners, if they're looking for 6% on their internal return on their investment, and your project is not producing that, then guess what? They're not going to invest. And so you can't do the project. And so that's where these subsidies may come in to help and support those types of gaps, so that you can pencil out, give your investors the rate of return that they want. You can pay for your construction costs, and you can implement some of these desires that you want to follow the land, right? Or to these deed restrictions or these attachments to the land, as Okura puts forth these RFPs. Just know that may take more collaboration. So if you decide that, then they have to figure out a way to make that a reality, to make that happen.
Deborah, thanks for these beautiful examples. They're great examples. I have some knowledge of some of these places intimately, and they tend to have a lot of maintenance nightmare. And then the other problem also is that most of the projects were done without the community's input, and it fails. So there's another example I could give. I think Brad Pitt's
Oh yeah, that's notorious. Yeah.
Okay, all right. So that's a totally different case, and I'm glad you know.
No, you can say it though. I'm sorry. Yeah.
No. I mean,
it was his response to Katrina.
Right.
Brad Pitt's response to Katrina. Yeah.
Beautiful solution, beautiful desire, but the construction, because of the chip, I think you addressed that earlier on, so you can't have it all. It failed miserably, and now the city has to really do something about cleaning up all those spaces that they have created. And the homeowners in those spaces are now homeless and have a debt on top of that. But anyhow, so I don't know, maybe putting the horse before the cart, but it would be beneficial, whoever is going to do this type of project in Oklahoma City in that area, to have experts or involve the community from the get-go to be a potential maintenance crew, right? So if we could use this as a way of empowering the communities and creating a job for those that could come out and then fix this thing and keep it running. But beyond that, I absolutely love this concept. So thanks.
Thank you, Deborah. That was very excellent. And I want to kind of piggyback on what was just said at the last two comments. And as I see it, there is a tremendous need for us as a community to walk this out from start to beginning. And as I think about the developers, the private owners, the individuals, I really see a need for us to stay connected with all of these partners and view them as partners and collaborate, provide the resources. You know, when you talked about the green space and the cost there, but as a community, we have many resources and assets. And I don't think that we need to be in a position to state the law without taking the hand of our partners and walking them through that. And as you stated, the last comment about projects that were not successful because the community really wasn't involved. But in addition to stating our desires or our vision, also be ready to provide the resources, be a resource, be a asset to private developers, to corporate developers, whatever the case may be, but to help them walk through and problem solve the challenges that we know will exist. And I just see it as a whole collaboration from A to Z.
Thank you, Deborah. All right, so much good conversation today. Thank you for closing this out, Deborah. And I think we are pretty much wrapped up for the day. Thank you all for being so active and participatory, and the conversation was very rich, and I learned a lot personally through the presentations and our conversations. So thank you all so much. And just to close this out really briefly, please let us know if we can help out on March 5th on those 2 sessions. I think I've already seen some emails coming in. Thank you all so much. But we need as many people as possible to help us facilitate. We will make sure you're prepared. There will be a little session to get us all ready so you know what activities are happening. So you'll just need to show up and plug in, but please let us know if you're available. And this concludes the reflection and education phase of the project. So next time we meet, we'll be moving into the visioning stage and really getting active and having dialogue specifically about the future of the area. So we'll see you next time. Thank you all so much. Thank you to our speakers, Dwayne, Christina, Deborah. Beautiful day, beautiful presentations, and we'll see you next time. Thank you. Bye, everyone on Zoom. See you next time. I was supposed to, well, as far as the video recordings, someone's putting the scripts. I don't know if Oh, yeah.